So there's two major ways in which people transform DNA into plants. One is to take very tiny gold particles and coat them with the DNA that you want to introduce into a plant species. And then you actually shoot those particles into living plant tissue. A lot of the cells die, but some of them survive. And some of the cells that survive take up the DNA that's on the gold particles. And then you can regenerate plants from those transformed cells and have a transgenic plant. The other approach that is preferable because it's easier is to use a bacterium, Agrobacterium tumefaciens, that has evolved the natural ability to transfer some of its DNA to plants that it associates with. So this is a process that evolved in nature long before we wanted to introduce genes into plants. And so the approach that people use is to introduce the genes that they want to introduce into a plant species into the bacterium, and then let the bacterium do the work for them and transfer those genes into a plant.
The big concern is just allergens. If you're allergic to peanuts and someone, a company creates a product that has a gene in it that keeps peanuts from molding but will keep this certain plant from molding or this certain crop from molding, they put that in there, someone eats it who does have a peanut allergy or a wheat allergy or whatnot, that can be dangerous if you don't know what's in the. I guess the other one that would be a concern probably would be horizontal gene transfer, where the gene from that plant, whatever it is that you eat, actually is incorporated into the gene structure of the person that eats it. And studies, there are a couple different studies out there that show that horizontal gene transfer can be bad for people with certain health risks or people who have had intestinal operations or whatnot, but it isn't a guarantee, and in most healthy population it hasn't happened, but it doesn't mean it can't.
Our bill is entirely focused on a consumer's right to know. This is a consumer bill. This has nothing to do with saying anything positive or negative about genetically engineered items, the way that they are produced. It's really giving citizens the right to know. And we found that there are many citizens that do want to know, and they want to know for a variety of reasons. Some want to know because they have health concerns, allergy concerns. Some are, some people are comfortable with genetic engineering. Others just feel that, the difference between a Bt toxin that is on a plant and that later is wiped off or it disappears or it's washed off is very different from a Bt toxin that actually becomes part of the plant. And that's disturbing to enough people. Just the concept of that they
introduced the original labeling bill, I think it was back in 2003. That bill at the time was a bit ahead of its time, and there were some legal questions whether we even had jurisdiction to do that. And then it was more recently, in actually the one term I wasn't serving, that the Vermont House eventually started working on a bill again. And I really helped spearhead both a lot of the political discussion in the building as well as strategic discussions within the building, hand in hand with the grassroots organizations and everyday citizens who wanted to have this information and who felt like we had a justifiable reason for this. In the legislative process, as legislators, we meet with the lawyers who work for the legislative body and tell them, we would like a bill that does this, and I said, a bill that does require labeling. And they will often create the legislative legal law terminology, and then we'll come back and say, well, do you want to include this or not include that? Or if you do it this way, it might bump into federal law. If you do it this way, it might bump into this kind of resistance legally. So you talk back and forth with the lawyers to try to draft a bill that legally is sound.
One of the things that you find when you go to the State House is you go thinking you're going to make these big changes, and then you find out that actually the ship of government is a very slow-moving ship. And to turn that ship, you're not going to be turning it 90, 180 degrees the way you think it's going to be when you start out as a citizen legislature and find out that you really just tick it away at small pieces.
And I think that this is also something that if as Vermonters we want to have this GMO labeling, then if you refuse to GMO label, we don't buy your product. And that's the only way to force big companies to do what's right. And I think that the GMO labeling it's a right bill. It's positive, it's a step forward.
From the general public, it's been very, very positive. I think from the perspective of those that are actually going to have to change their labeling, that there's some grumbling, as there would be. Of course, whenever we're asking someone to do something that's likely to be more expensive, that they're going to have to go through a more rigorous protocol, yeah, that's hard, and we accept that.
You can find lots of people and you can ask them, and that's where the GMO versus organic line gets blurred, or the debate. So many people are gluten-free now, but don't know what gluten is and don't know if they're sensitive to it or not. It's very fashionable to, well, I only eat organic things. Well, you can eat GMO organic things. There is a lot of one side or the other, and you can find a study that says basically what you would like to hear. And it's important for a public just to educate themselves about what they're eating, good or bad, and then they have the option of making that choice. But being an informed populace is
our food and their desire to know more about it, and they also advocated to various colleagues, House and Senate, that they wanted this and why they wanted it. We also do have a growing awareness among the general population. Some are looking for the non-GMO verified label, which is a good thing to give consumers information. I think it's a less than fortunate thing, because those of us that don't use GMOs shouldn't have to say, we don't use this technology. Those that use it should have to bear the cost of informing the public. Not, we don't use it, but we have to go through a costly process to say we don't use it. That seems a little bit backwards to me.
I think this is a tip of the iceberg, and I would be very surprised if very shortly a lot more states didn't jump on board with that. I think that the public is a lot more educated than they used to be. They know, students read labels. Students look at expiration dates. They look to see what it is. They're smarter because they've had more education. There's more information out there. It's easier to acquire than it used to be.
There are some studies out there that do show reason for concern. The arguments that come forward is that people say that getting rid of, removing GMOs would increase pesticide use. But in actuality, we find that the reverse is true. 1996 to 2011, while insect use on GE corn has declined by 123 million pounds, herbicides used have increased by 527 million pounds. And the net result overall is an increase of 403 pounds of pesticide use on GE crops. So that argument doesn't hold. We're also seeing more plants that are resistant to Roundup, glyphosate, and so there are those concerns as well.
Keeps my awareness up with respect to the difficulty of farming. How many tools do make farming somewhat easier, so that we're not working 20 hours a week, we can work 16 hours a day. And I recognize that those who use GMOs are doing it because economically and time and energy wise, it seems to make sense. There's a neighbor dairy farm that has a very large field of GMO corn right near our farm. We make sure to grow our corn on other fields far from there so that there's no risk of cross-pollination. So it does make us adjust our growing habits, but we do not use GMOs. And now in the last 10 or 15 years, I think people are becoming a little more aware of the fact that we are what we eat, which is an age-old adage, but we sort of forgot.
It'd be like, and I'm not saying GMOs are arsenic, but it'd be like a company putting arsenic in something and not labeling it, and then saying, oh my God, all these people are dead. Not that I'm saying GMOs kill people, I'm not saying that. I'm saying we don't know enough about GMOs.
At the end of the day, this is a consumer right to know bill. Transparency is a critical part of democracy. Without that transparency, we can't build trust. It's so great to know that the FDA is there to inspect food and label food and let us know what is in it. It makes me confident as I travel around the country, knowing that that's in place. It builds trust. But to fight the transparency on this, I take issue with that, and I think that they got on the wrong side of that. Just tell us. People will make a choice. No one's telling you that you can't do it.